start recording. Oh, I'm getting a transcription as well, apparently. That's good. Fantastic. Oh no, I don't want to have to look at my own transcript. That's awful. Get rid of that.
It's okay. You have to have like a whole different set of language skills to kind of interpret the way in which it captures for the transcript. It's quite entertaining, actually, for comedy value.
I'm not sure how my my Blythe accent would fare on the transcript, but we'll find out, I guess. So welcome everyone. Hopefully, I'm going to share. I'm going to do the terrible thing of sharing my screen, but not doing the full presentation thing because I've got some issues with Teams. But welcome. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. I'm going to do a very brief introduction to the Mayor's Schools Climate Challenge, and then hopefully I will be handing over to CJ from Ubisoft. Brief bit on running order, a quick introduction for myself and CJ, then we're going to talk about the project principles and software. We'll discuss the tenets of game design and then support and next steps. So I'm going to jump out of my presentation actually because I can't admit people into the call when I'm on full screen, which is a bit frustrating. But let me just I think I'd rather be here and talking to you than worrying about my slide. So the reason we've decided to do this this year, Mayor Jamie Driscoll has been very public on the North of Tyne climate change agenda. We've over the past few months we held a climate change citizens assembly. With over 30 hours of input from our citizens, and one of the big recommendations from that was raising awareness, that we needed to raise awareness with our residents across the north of Tyne, which covers Northumberland, North Tyneside and Newcastle. Another bit of work that the North of Tyne Combined Authority are doing in this space is something called the Green New Deal, where we are investing in supporting communities and businesses to develop new products and services to make our world a greener one. But one thing that the Mayor in particular is very keen on is engaging young people. So he launched the Mayor's Schools Climate Challenge, and we're doing work with primary schools, first schools, middle schools, high schools, secondary schools. We've got a mix of different phases and different systems. But when it came to Key Stage 5, we discussed the belief that actually gaming is a really great way to capture imagination and to explore and get a better understanding of real world issues. And to that end, we said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could ask our Key Stage 5 students across the north of Tyne to engage in a challenge. So the gauntlet is being thrown down, and the fact that you're here this evening suggests that you're ready and willing to accept this challenge. So we really want you to develop a computer game that helps to raise awareness about climate change. That might be a specific thing about climate change, or it might be a general issue about climate change. So to help us through this, we've got some experts. So I'm not going to talk much more. This is pretty much the last you'll hear from me, other than a wrap up at the end or to answer any sticky questions. But we've got some experts on the call today. So from Ubisoft, I'm very excited that we've got people from Ubisoft on the call. I'm a complete gaming nerd. So for those of you who haven't heard of Ubisoft, they're behind huge franchises like Assassin's Creed and many more, but I'll let them blow their own trumpet in a minute. So we've got CJ who's going to talk a bit about Ubisoft and gaming generally. We've got a developer from Ubisoft, Andy Buck, who's going to talk about the tenets of game design, and then we've got Gary and Graham from Newcastle University's School of Computing, who again are experts in this field, who are going to talk through, with reference to this particular project, some of the principles of game design and some of the software that they're recommending that you use. And then we've got another expert. We have Professor of Earth Systems Engineering, Richard Dawson, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the climate change issues you might want to fold into your game. And then we've actually we've got someone who's not on the call now, but will be joining in a little while. Steve Bunce, who's going to be on hand for support throughout the project. So if you hit a point where you need a bit of help thinking through your work, and you want to maybe, I don't know, maybe you've underestimated just how good you are at this, and you want to add a level, for example, or add some features, then Steve will be your first point of contact. The one thing I would say is we're trying not to be too prescriptive with this. We're trying to let you take this wherever you want to take it. So we're going to give you some serving suggestions, but we're not going to say you must. We've got this kickoff workshop, but we've also got a second workshop on the 24th of November. It'd be great if you could attend that. It'd be a good opportunity for you to ask some specific questions, and we can answer them hopefully. There's an option for you to go in and get into the university itself in person on the 1st of December, which would be brilliant, and see the School of Computing. We would ideally like you to showcase your games on the 5th of January. Now, there's inherently there a hand in. Ideally, we'd like to be able to play the games ahead of the 4th, but if you're rocking up on the 5th, if you're rocking up on the 5th and just want to share screen and show us what you've developed, that's fine too. That's absolutely fine. Ideally, we'd like you to hand something in ahead of the Christmas break, but if you don't, that's absolutely fine. We have got that showcase opportunity on the 5th, and that's kind of where we're going to draw a line under this particular project and share the work that we've all done between now and then. In terms of your team, we asked you to submit a team, and that team can be up to 6 people, but indeed it can just be you on your lonesome. So that's absolutely fine. You can be a team of 1, and indeed a very well functioning one, I'm sure. Yeah, we're going to talk a bit about the technology in a minute, but as I say, we're not particularly prescribing that. It is going to be, if you're comfortable with a particular application or your programming language, however you want to do it, then that's absolutely up to your good selves. So hopefully you can see we're really interested in what you produce and not necessarily how you get there. So that said, I'm going to hand over now to CJ Stockton from Ubisoft. I'm very excited to hand over and hear from CJ.
I feel like my entire life I've been told that you have to show you're working out. So this is a revolution to me. You don't care how you got to your answer, just get to it. It's amazing. I love it. It's an absolute delight to be here today. This is the second sort of call that I've done today, outreach to talk about how freaking awesome video games are, and the kind of, I guess, power that we wield as a force for good. And I think that quite often we can be demonized in the press for all sorts of horrible things that we do to players, or that we squeeze money out, or that we shoot things, or whatever it is. But actually, games as a way to engage, and as Adrian says, to raise awareness on particular topics is becoming more prevalent. And there's more organizations looking at how gamification can really sort of engage people and build that interest. So I'm super excited to be here. So I have some slides which I'm going to attempt to share. And the reason that I'm using slides is because they are infinitely cooler than I am. So let me just see if this works. Oh. And let's hope that I've opened the right one as well. It's thinking about it. It's thinking about it. Okay, so it's one, at the minute it's one slide. Okay, no, that's the wrong slideshow. We're going to look at a slightly different slideshow. Every decent call has, slight technical hiccups. Okay. Oh, no, that's definitely not the right one. Oh, dear me. Right, okay. Let's do a different way of doing this. Share your screen. Okay, this is the right one. I feel like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So I don't know what you know about Ubisoft, or what you don't know about Ubisoft. A lot of people have heard of us. We're the 3rd largest games publisher in the world. And as Adrian says, we have our grubby little mitts on things like Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Watch Dogs, Mario Rabbids, The Settlers, the list could go on and on and on. And Ubisoft Reflections and Ubisoft Leamington are 2 of Ubisoft's AAA studios in the UK. So like I say, 20,000 people. We're spread across the world. We've got over 40 studios. So Ubisoft Reflections and Ubisoft Leamington. Ubisoft Reflections is one of the oldest AAA studios in the world, I believe. We have some devs that have been with us for a very, very long time, which I think is testament to the great work that we've done. Ubisoft Leamington joined our Ubisoft family a couple of years ago, and they work with us on all sorts of different games. And we combined 40 years of experience in an industry that's still often referred to as being really immature or you know, just very fresh and very new. I'm 40, so then I also count myself as being immature and fresh and young. So I'm okay with that. We are creators and collaborators. So yeah, like I said, we've worked on Assassin's Creed, The Division, Far Cry, Watch Dogs, Ghost Recon, The Settlers, Starlink, The Crew. More locally, we developed Grow Up, Ode, and Atomega, and Andy, who's going to speak to you later, was very heavily involved in the development of those three sort of indie titles, which is very exciting. Currently, we have teams working on lots of super cool stuff that I can't tell you anything about, otherwise I will be shot. So I'm hoping this video works, because if it doesn't, it's a big anticlimax, but I wanted to show you who we are. And I think this little video that I'm hopefully going to show you is going to sum that up pretty well. Fingers crossed. Wave, Adrian, because I can see your little face if there's no audio. Just 1 second. It takes a second to kick in. Audio? Okay. I know what I'm doing here. Hang on, hang on, hang on. Oh, 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 oh. Is it gone? Building up the anticipation, building up the hype. It's all really exciting. It's coming, I promise. Okay, ready, steady. Fingers crossed, everyone.
Thank you very much. And two, please.
Walking 100 feet tall, 100 feet tall. She got me going, 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 going. She got me going, 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 going. What's what it is, what's what it is. What's what it is, what's what it is, what's what it is. Oh yeah, they know it, 'cause I was out. And nothing can stop us now. Nothing can stop us now. Nothing can stop us now. And nothing can stop us now. And nothing can stop us now.
Hang on, building up the anticipation again. I feel like I need to kind of caveat that a little bit and say it's not quite like that every day. There's a lot of challenges that we have to overcome, and there's a lot of hard work. And I haven't seen a single shark in the studio once. Andy, have you seen a shark in the studio? No, so I haven't seen a single shark. But genuinely, a lot of the stuff that has happened in there, I've seen stuff that's happened that's very similar. And the games industry itself is a beautiful amalgamation of very hard, serious work. A lot of incredible people with a huge raft of talent that makes me feel woefully inadequate on a daily basis. It's an industry that's got excitement and enthusiasm and passion, and I've never worked anything like it. And as I said, I'm quite old and I've worked in lots of crackers jobs. So yeah, I'm going to stop waffling. Let me just say that Ubisoft is cool, but we are absolutely thrilled to be supporting Newcastle University and North of Tyne in this. So I hope you enjoy this call today, and what Andy's going to talk about later, which is much more factual but you know, less sharks. So thank you very much. Adrian, was I supposed to say anything else? Okay, it's good.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Amazing.
That's brilliant. Thank you. So now I'd like to turn over to Gary and Graham, who I think is perched over Gary's shoulder from the School of Computing at Newcastle University, just to talk about some of the specifics and some serving suggestions for how you might want to actually bring an idea to life as part of this particular challenge. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian, and thanks, CJ, for making your talk so impossible to follow. So yeah.
My pleasure.
So I've got a few slides to share. They're nothing like as exciting as the Ubisoft ones. Did you do this? Okay, I haven't shared a screen on Teams before. You. Here we are at the School of Computing, wondering how to do this.
Should be up at the top next to leave share content, and I think you'll get your windows up at that point.
Gary's running his Mac.
Oh.
His additional security preferences. We could just talk about it for a bit while Gary does this.
Yeah.
But we're really pleased that people are encouraged and coming online on this talk. And this is a fantastic opportunity. Ubisoft, who is, as you've just heard, one of the leading developers in the world of video games, is helping. We've also got Richard, who's one of the leading professors in the world in climate change. And of course, we've got Game Lab, which is Gary and myself run here in Newcastle, who provided over 400 developers straight into the video games industry. So the northeast of England is a powerhouse for the video games industry. It always has for the past 50 years. We've developed some of the biggest games of all time and helped develop them and helped provide the talent to do that. And this really is an opportunity, and to take this opportunity to go forward and produce a game, produce content in this competition and participate is absolutely an opportunity and a half. And we're here to help, we're here to guide, we're here to advise in a university capacity. As I said, we've been doing this for about 15 years now, and we are quite well versed in it. Gary, is it going to happen? I don't think it's going to.
It's not going to happen, is it?
No.
No.
Just trouble sharing the screen. So
You could email to me and I could share it if that's any help.
Gary, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess we can talk a little bit more, and we can send the slides around separately. Yeah, so to echo what both CJ and Graham were saying, that there's a proud tradition of game development in the Northeast, and game development requires a really interesting kind of Venn diagram of technical skills and creativity coming together in the middle and going off in some really fantastic directions. And we'd really like to encourage that during this project. We're really, really pleased when Adrian approached us at Newcastle University to get involved with this and getting it out to the local schools. I do have a slide of suggested technologies, but we'll maybe start with the kind of teams that we're looking for here. As Adrian says, team size, anything from 1 student up to around 6. And we really don't want to set any limits on the kind of games you want to be developing, as long as they're promoting the ideas around climate change in some way. The big advice I guess I would give is don't be too ambitious. Try and build something which is just maybe one level with very small set of gameplay in there. You're not going to be able to build something the size of Assassin's Creed in the 6 or 7 weeks that we have. But if you're aiming to build something small and lovely and kind of self-regulated, then the tools which are available can get you up and running very, very quickly. If you want to make a 2D game, there's a game engine called GDevelop, where you can knock together a demo really, really quickly using that, and then polish it, spend the time polishing it to make it brilliant. If you want to try having to go in 3D games, something like either Unity 3D or the Unreal Engine, again, they let you put together games, fairly straightforward games, very, very quickly. So you can really get the heart of what the point of the game is without worrying about the underlying technology too much. So I would suggest, in terms of the team makeup, you're going to probably need someone fairly technical to use these packages. They're fairly straightforward to use. There's lots of tutorials and blueprints available to get you up and running quickly. So you want probably one person on the technical side of things at least. But you also want some creative people. Perhaps the one person can do all of these things. You want some game design. You might want to create some 3D or 2D art assets. There's a package called Blender, which allows you to create 3D art assets really quickly in a format which is ideal for Unity or for Unreal. So yeah, you're going to want technical people and some creative people, or people who can do both in the team there. All of these packages, they're free to use. You just need to go on the website. We'll send the links around. Just download it, install it, and off you go. The free licenses. I think if you start making tens of thousands of pounds, they start to charge you for use of the technology. But we leave that kind of thing up to Ubisoft. Yeah, I think that was about it from the slides, really.
Yeah.
Gary, can I just ask a really quick question and maybe bring in Chris, if that's all right? So Chris had a technical question about using some other software to develop the game, due to Gosforth Academy using a programming environment. Chris, I see that you're on the call. I don't know if you're able to unmute and just ask Gary the question that you'd sent me earlier in the week.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yes, got you there, Chris. Thank you.
So we have a programming environment on our network which limits our internet capabilities. So we've got a very limited selection of IDEs. Are there any like online IDEs that we could possibly use that could help with this project? I know we've used Replit before, and there are a few other ones, but they are very simple things that use things like Pygame.
Okay. Yeah.
There are online, you mean in-browser developer tools?
Sorry, could you say that again?
In-browser development tools.
Yes, so things like REPL.it, there's a few others that's slipping my mind at the moment.
Yeah, so there's Construct 2 and a few other elements like JavaScript-based engines which you can use in browser. So that's fine. That's no problem. Don't restrict yourself to a particular type of technology or engine. We really want people to use what they feel familiar with. I mean, remember, the key to success is not necessarily a cinematic experience. When people make video games, you must always remember to think about what you're asking the player to do. So what is the player doing? It might be something very simply presented, but the player has to be engaged and play something. Quite often when we deal with students at the university, they're quite good at creating an environment which they can explore and see things, and it looks quite nice, but you have to play something. It's got to be a game, got to be a challenge. So what's the challenge? What you're asking the player to do? What buttons are they pressing? That kind of thing. So try not to think too much about the thematic kind of imagery, but try to ground it a bit more in what the player's actually doing. And these online tools, they're fine. So if you find something you feel comfortable with, that's fine. Don't worry about that. I don't think there's anything which we haven't programmed or messed about with or destroyed in the past 2 years. So don't worry about that.
Okay, thank you very much.
And just to say as well, if anyone does have any questions as we're going through, feel free to jump in, stick your electronic hand up, or indeed just unmute yourselves and interrupt. Very happy to take questions as we go through. So Gary and Graham, was there anything else that you wanted to cover, just in your bit about how this might unfold?
A couple of other things occurred while Graham was speaking. Just reminded me in terms of how the game's presented. As you probably noticed, we're pretty much agnostic in terms of how it's developed, but also how it's presented. Ideally, if you can host it on a web page, then we can just play it online, and the engine packages I mentioned all allow you to do that. You can export the game in a format where it can be played online, but then you do have to have somewhere where it's hosted. Alternatively, if you just package it up as an executable, then we can install it and run it at this end, and hopefully we'll see some video demos of it running anyway. And just one final thing, we have done quite a lot of work around educational games, as Graham mentioned, as well as concentrating on what the player is doing on that gameplay. We often see students tempted to put in lots and lots of textual references to try and get the education aspect over, and people get bored with that. It's not really a good thing to do. It's much better if you have very snappy visual and audio feedback. So we recently had a game around water pollution, and one of the games you have to herd up some sheep and put them in a pen to basically stop them pooping in a river. If it went wrong, you see these sheep pooping in a river. It's a very visual bad thing to have happen. You don't need all that text explaining why livestock polluting rivers is a bad idea. I just thought I'd finish with a story about sheep poop, really. So back to Adrian.
Thank you. Yeah, and just a note for any of our students as well. If there's any questions that you have, feel free to jump in and ask. Or indeed, if you're, I'm not sure of the setup, but if you're sat with your teacher, give them a nudge and just ask them to ask the question on your behalf, either in the chat or as I say, unmute yourselves and jump in. I think now will be a good, as we've just sort of touched on sheep poop there, it might be a good idea now to bring in a climate change expert, if that's all right. So if we could just bring in Richard, who, as I said at the top of the call, I believe is Professor of Earth Systems Engineering. Is that right, Richard? Have I got your title
yeah,
right?
that's right. But I've been working in the I suppose on problems looking at how we adapt to climate change. So a lot of my own work is focused on extreme weather and what we can do about it from a sort of engineering perspective. But I think my talk's going to be quite short and just cover a few of the kind of key issues that certainly go beyond just my own sort of personal research area. So and first off, and I apologise if this is old hat to you on the call, but I didn't know exactly where to start. So I thought I'd just kick off with a bit of a reminder about what's kind of driving all of this. Why are we thinking about this? And the big issue is around carbon dioxide, or indeed other greenhouse gas emissions, of which CO2 is one of the most prevalent. And what happens is that these gases essentially act as a sort of barrier to keep heat trapped around planet Earth. And that's quite a useful barrier. It has been a useful barrier because without it, there wouldn't have been life on Earth to start off with. We had to get some sort of warmth. But in recent years, and since the Industrial Revolution in which of course kicked off in this part of the world really a few hundred years ago, CO2 emissions were broadly stable and had been for some time. But since then, we've seen acceleration of the amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, and that is actually leading to increased warming because less heat is getting out than has done previously. So we're changing, if you like, the thickness, the amount of that kind of greenhouse gas in our atmosphere. So if in terms of a game, there's one sort of very kind of key indicator there, which could form part of anything, and that is around these global greenhouse gas emissions. But what does that mean? And these are just some, it's kind of gratuitous kind of weather damage pictures from across Great Britain. And you can see all over disruption to transport, fires, loss of land, coastal erosion, infrastructure that's been damaged by extreme weather, flooding, and so on. And you know, that's I suppose the visible aspect of climate change impacts. But kind of looking a bit deeper than that, what does all that mean? Well, these actually start to have an impact on our food supplies, our availability of water, disruption of power and travel and other communications and so on. And that sometimes this is an irritant. You know, losing our internet for an hour because somewhere's got flooded. But sometimes actually it's far more serious when you think about, as happened, it was about 3 or 4 years ago now, flooding in York led to the loss of the 999 services around Tyneside. And so actually, these sorts of extreme weather events can have really serious risk to sort of people's life and property. Kind of globally, we're also seeing how climate change is bringing and allowing some diseases to actually move around the world. So tropical diseases, you know, we're perhaps used to hearing about being confined to Africa, maybe starting to move closer to, if not the UK just yet, certainly into the Mediterranean areas. That we're seeing sort of new invasive species being able to establish themselves in this country, plants and animals, because of a kind of gradually warming situation. So, you know, the sort of the immediate kind of damage that we might see, the very visible stuff, but then that has knock-on effects to the sorts of things which really, you know, improve and enable our quality of life. And so what can we do? And I think, you know, that this is one area where there's a lot of potential for gamification, if you like. It's around choices that we have. One, you know, some of those could be playing with the idea of how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, perhaps through testing, you know, different energy futures, alternative energy sources, or what technology can be put in place to actually remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. People talk about planting trees as being able to absorb more carbon dioxide, but trees take up land. If we use more trees for forests, do we have enough land to grow all of the food we might want to do, or build and develop houses for people to live in? And so again, often these sort of trade-offs between different choices around reducing carbon dioxide or meeting other kind of objectives. One of the biggest challenges is actually around the materials and our sort of supply chains. If cement was a country, then it would be one of the world's most sort of polluting nations. I think probably number 3 or 4 in the list, because it is probably one of the biggest single sources of CO2 emissions, because it's so prevalent in a lot of the construction that we do, but also it's very kind of energy intensive process to manufacture it. Individually, coming down to a sort of a more personal scale, we all have choices about how we travel, how efficient our houses could be, the appliances we have in them, the diet that we have, and so on. And so, there could be potential for exploring kind of gamification at that sort of individual level. And I suppose the other big one, and I've just come back from Glasgow today, where I was at the kind of the UN negotiations that are taking place. And some of these kind of international agreements, how different countries are positioning themselves to actually try and reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. But of course, we're all starting, each nation is starting from a different place. and for some people, the oil is very much their economy. So there's lots of interesting challenges there, and potential gamification ideas around that sort of global agreements around carbon reduction. And this area, this kind of adaptation, as it's called, limiting the effects of climate change, this is much more what I do. And the game that Gary referred to around sheep poop, that was something that we've been working on together in communicating issues around water management, and how different practices can actually reduce pollution in water. If you reduce the amount of water that's dirty, you make more water available. If you've got more water available, you are more resilient to climate change. So it's sort of linking in some of these practices around farming back to climate change adaptation. That there are also a whole load of options around, flooding and coastal management, whether that's building giant new walls, not always everyone's cup of tea, use of so-called nature-based solutions. This is often, maybe that's re-establishing vegetation on the coast, or building up sand dunes and beaches to hold back waves. But also looking at choices around planning, where we site things. I mentioned this idea between, planting trees to reduce carbon emissions, or but also that takes up land. And sometimes, we often end up building in the floodplain because there are other pressures outside or further away from rivers that mean it's difficult to actually build in places that are not liable to flood. So some of these trade-offs and choices about where we build, how we build, how we use and manage the natural environment through the way we, practices for agriculture or so on, what we set aside for habitats for different species and so on, and animals and plants, those are all choices that have good and bad, or all things we want to do, but we can't win at everything. Sometimes we have to make a choice about how we use that. So lots of options there, lots of things to look at. And I thought I'd also just point you towards, I can send the slides around or put these links in the chat box for people to follow up with. Just some resources that I've come across already that are looking at games in a kind of climate change context. And, these might provide some inspiration or ideas and things to look at and think about as you go about this competition moving forward. And so I think that's it from me. Very high level, very short, but by all means, happy to kind of follow up and answer any questions I can.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Richard. Really helpful introduction to some of the issues that we might want to explore when we are developing our games. And indeed, as I've said a couple of times, we are recording this session. I know if I were developing this game, I would be going back to the recording of this, and I will be looking back at that bit as I wanted to refine my ideas and make sure I was on the right track. And actually, yeah, if you send me that presentation, I'll make sure that we send that out to all the students who are taking up the challenge. That's brilliant. Does anyone have any burning questions for Richard while we've got him on the call? Questions or challenges from anyone? Okay, everyone's being very well behaved, which is fine, but we do open the floor to challenges and questions. In that case, thank you, Richard. We're probably going to move on now to Andy Buck, who's going to talk to us about some of the tenets of game design. So Andy, yeah, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you. I'm really excited to hear your input and tell us all how we should go about designing our game.
Hi everybody. So calling them tenets of game design implies that somebody's actually written these things down and we know exactly what we're doing all the time, which is not necessarily true. Now, I've been making games since the early 90s, and I've a broad sort of set of skills, and so I get involved in all sorts of different parts of game design. And these days, I primarily focus on making small scale things, which is probably quite useful for all of you, because that's pretty much what you're aiming to do here. You're aiming to produce something in a short space of time that's a relatively small scale thing that focuses on the key principles around climate change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through a few of the things that you might want to kind of keep to the top of your mind, sort of consider as you're designing and thinking about the game you're going to make from a design perspective. So it doesn't matter which engine you make this in. It doesn't matter what exactly your chosen topics and things like that actually are. These things are universal in many ways. So first thing you should really try and do is identify some key, a very small number of key things that you want to focus on for your subject, for your either your message, your themes and things like this. As Gary already mentioned, scale, keeping the scale in mind is important. You want to make sure that you're trying to produce something that's well focused, that's nice and small. And if you look at successful small scale games, sort of indie games and things like that, you can see that they're really honing in on singular mechanics and single ideas. So step one, make sure you've got a nice small target that you want to hit, something that's well defined. If you look at games like Minecraft or Mario or whatever, they have single simple mechanics in them that they focus on, and then they attach other ideas to them. So that's one. Try and identify what you want as your core mechanics. So if it's a platforming game or something like that, then maybe your core mechanics are to do with moving around and jumping and navigating and collecting or moving things. If it's a strategy game of some sort, then you want to move and look around the environment and maybe select and interrogate and identify things and make choices. But those are core mechanics. They're the key things that you do second to second, and they should be the fundamental parts of your game, and it's important that they are fun on a second by second basis, even if the game itself doesn't exist. If you just stood Mario in an empty room and jumped him around, he's quite fun. He doesn't need a level. He doesn't need a world to live in. He is fun every second that you play with him, and it's important to make sure that you have a basic set of mechanics and controllable things that you do moment to moment to keep the player engaged on a second by second basis. Now, at the other end of the scale, it's also important to try and make sure that you've got clear objectives that you're trying to talk to the player about. Identify the largest loop of your game. Identify what it is that you want the player to do. Again, I'm going to use Mario as an example. So the objective there is to rescue the princess. So the objective for every single part of the game is actually to repeatedly rescue the princess. I mean, more recent Mario games try and mess with that basic principle, but fundamentally, your game is about something, about a single objective that the player is aiming to achieve. And your core mechanics, your core loop, which is those moment-to-moment actions, should allow you to progress towards that goal. It's important to look at those two things, the large-scale loop of the large-scale objective of the game and those small core loops, and make sure that they fit together. Make sure that one informs the other. If they look like if they look like they don't match, then choose something else. Try and see if you can pick a different mechanic or a different way of talking about your objectives, so that the idea of rescuing the princess, in the case of Mario, matches with the idea of enjoying the process of navigating through the environment to get to the princess. If Mario was a car or something like that, then the environment would have to change, and the core loop could still be the same, but the way that you do things would obviously look a little bit different. So that's one of the key things to do. So you've got step one: identify a small, well-defined target that you want to hit. Next, identify some core loops, the big, long objective that you want to actually convey to the player about their overall objective for the game, save the planet, and that's a very large and very ill-defined objective. So you need to focus on something a little bit more clear, like stopping sheep pooping in lakes. That's a clear objective, and then you consider what core mechanics might support that. So you could herd the sheep. You could run around chasing sheep away from lakes. That's, herding is quite a fun, simple mechanic that you could imagine trying to implement. You can also, on top of that, consider the loops that sit in the middle of these two things, the large scale and the small scale. You can identify this in many of the games that you probably play on a regular basis, things like compulsion loops. So many games contain loops that reinforce the other systems that are there. So a compulsion loop is something like you kill a monster, you take the things off of the monster, or you gain some experience points, and then you go to a shop and then you buy a bigger hat and a bigger axe and you find a bigger monster. The start activity compels you to carry on through the other parts of the game to re-engage in it and re-enjoy those kinds of activities. So with all of these things set down, now you've got yourself a good idea, and you've got some good core mechanics, and you've got some large scale objectives. You've got to make sure that you are focusing on the player, on what it is that the player is experiencing. So your role as a game designer, as a game creator, is to entertain and engage the player. Your role shouldn't be to defeat the player. It's not you versus the player. It's you bringing an experience to the player that they can engage in and they can enjoy. So whenever you're designing these mechanics and these challenges that the player's facing, it's important to remember that you should be allowing the player to feel empowered or allow the player to feel capable. You set them challenges, and they need to defeat those things, or they need to overcome those challenges. But at the same time, you should be indicating how those challenges should be overcome or could be overcome. You need to inform the player about what steps that they could take or should take to achieve their goals. It's no good just presenting them with a giant boss or a big problem and not giving them the tools and showing them the way that those tools work. So at every stage, and you see this in games that you enjoy, you'll find that the mechanics and the challenges that you're presented are also come with a set of tools that allow you to overcome those challenges. And by using those tools, you feel powerful, you feel capable, and it helps helps the whole thing feel more engaging. So remember that your job is to engage and entertain the player, and also make sure that you're giving as much feedback about what's going on in the world to the player as possible. Anywhere that you've got the opportunity to add a little bit more juice, a little bit more shake and wobble and sparkles and or just information about what it is that's actually going on in the world and what the actions of the player mean, the more players will get a sense of what the world is doing around them. It's no good having a deep and complicated system of simulation or whatever if the player never sees the internals of that system. That you need to bring all of that information back to them and show them what's going on underneath the hood, and that will produce a much more engaging experience. And finally, this is more focused on this challenge and on the groups that you're going to build. You're creating something in a relatively short space of time. And as somebody that has to regularly make things in quite a short space of time, it's important to try and focus on your strengths. Don't pick an elaborate, partially solved problem, something extremely tricky. Actually, just think, what, we've got like a bunch of artists, and you can do characters pretty well, and some audio, that's great, but we haven't got a really, maybe you haven't got a programmer. Or maybe you haven't got somebody that can build characters even. But you might have somebody that can build something else or make other things. Look at the team that you've got. Look at the people that you're working with, and think what is the easiest thing that we could do? What are we good at? And then think how it is you can use those great skills, the things you're good at, effectively together, rather than try and take on a problem that sounds like a cool idea, but actually would require you to make animations for 300 characters or something. if you haven't got a character animator to start with, then don't start down that path, as it were. Choose your battles, and you're more likely to succeed. Really, I think that covers everything. So I'll take it from the top in a short summary. We've got focus on something nice and small and, clear. Identify the large scale objectives and the large scale game loops, as well as the small scale core loops about what it is that the player's doing moment to moment. Identify some of the intermediate loops, like the compulsion loops and the reward loops and things like that sit inside those two spaces. And all the time focus on what it is that the player is doing, what their objectives are. Focus on the idea that you as a game designer are entertaining and creating an experience for the player to engage them. You're not trying to fight with them. And overall, play to your strengths. That's it, really. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy. You make it sound incredibly easy.
It's very straightforward. That's why we have thousands of people.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you. Again, I'll throw that open to questions. Has anyone got a question that they want to pose to Andy while we have him? Looking for microphones. Unmuting in front of me. I'm not seeing any at the moment, and I don't see any hands. Again, if I were taking on this challenge, I would absolutely be revisiting this video and listening back to that, Andy, and just making a few notes if I was going to embark on this piece. But certainly some incredibly helpful and really practical advice there. So that's really, really good to hear. Thanks so much for that input. I did promise that we would try and be under an hour, but I see Steve Bunce has joined us, so I do want to just introduce Steve to everyone. Steve, I said in your absence at the start of the call that you might be someone who could be a point of contact for our students who are engaging in the challenge, and indeed if perhaps they're struggling to I don't know, to put into practice some of the advice Andy's just given, you might be a good person to share some ideas with. Is it okay if you just sort of perhaps introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So thank you all for coming along this afternoon. I'm just going to recap sort of what we just covered, really. So hopefully you can see this here. It's really great to say, as Adrian's mentioned, I'm a point of contact for you to to get in touch with if you've got any questions. So my background is in teaching, but also with a long time being interested in games and coding with that too. So basically, with myself and Adrian here, we've heard today a lovely sort of description from CJ all about sort of Ubisoft and about what they're doing. Gary and Graham have told us about the project. Richard's explained about climate change, and Andy there's given some great advice here about the game design. So with all these things, as Adrian mentioned, it's a recording that you can play back and you can watch again. Gary mentioned again also about the GDevelop, is the 2D software, and also the 3D software of Unity and Unreal Engine. And this is really just the overview of where we're at today. So we've got our kickoff today. You've got in 2 weeks' time where you can come along and ask for advice, and it's great to get some early feedback on your ideas. I've just been working with a school today where, again, they could spend forever, either designing a game or an app or something like that. But then actually, if you don't get early feedback, maybe you go off in the wrong direction. So great to come along in a fortnight to get the advice and ask questions. The 1st of December, we mentioned the visit, and then the game showcase in January next year. So with all of these things today, if you've got any questions, you can get in touch with me and I'll hopefully field those to the right person in the project. There's the very catchy email address there. Because this is the Key Stage 5 Gaming Challenge, the email address is keystage5gamingchallenge@gmail.com. So if you've got any questions, Brilliant. If you'd like to just filter them to me there, and I'll hopefully get those to the right person and try and get you some answers.
Steve, okay. We can't see we're still on that first slide there.
Yeah,
there we go. Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you.
You can see it there. Apologies there. Did you just see the first one all the way through, was it? No worries. Okay, so so just to recap, this is what you've seen. These were the engines, the game engines, so GDevelop and Unity. Unreal Engine, there's the 3D engine. There's the dates again. And then finally, say if you want to get in touch, then it's this handy keystage3gamingchallenge@gmail.com. So if you've got any questions, you can point them to that email address. I'll pick them up and then filter those to whoever needs those. So thanks very much, everybody.
Brilliant, thank you. I will send out information to everyone who I can send information to. Final opportunity for questions from the floor. If anyone's got a question, please don't be shy. Although I do appreciate we've bombarded you with information this evening, and there was quite a lot to cram into an hour, so we've been through a fair bit there. Well, first of all, thank you to those of you who've engaged with this and who are interested in picking up the challenge. We're really excited to see what you're gonna produce. Thanks to everyone who's contributed to the call this evening. So I'm not going to list everyone, but thanks everyone. As you can see, we've got an array of experts from the gaming and climate change world. So you have access to everyone who's on the call. So if you've got any specific questions that you want to direct to any individual, please, through the email address that Steve shared, please do get in touch, and we'll make sure that the right person can field any questions that you have. Look at that, we're just coming up to being on time. If I'm honest, I'm quite surprised we managed to do that, but there we are. It's what can I say? It's panned out very well. So thanks again for those of you who are going to pick up the challenge. Thanks for everyone who's contributed this evening. As we said, our next session is on the 24th of November, but please do get in touch between now and then if you've got any questions whatsoever. I will end the recording there, and I will send it out to all of the participants. So thanks very much, and see you hopefully on the 24th.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.